Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Hello and welcome to the course Introduction to the Psychology of Bilingualism and Multilingualism. I am Dr. Ark from the Department of Cognitive Sciences at IIT Kanpur. In this week, I am talking to you about miscellaneous topics in bilingualism and multilingualism. We are basically looking at other ways in which bilingualism, being a bilingual or multilingual, can actually impact our life and other practical considerations that are there. Now, in the previous lecture, I was talking to you about the aspect of acquiring literacy and learning to writing systems, that are important challenges for a bilingual or a multilingual. That is basically, if you look at that in a broader sense, both of those things have to do with this, broader notion that is more prevalent these days, which is of bilingual education. Now, you would know that more than 50% of the children, in our country or across the world actually attend schools where they are actually, the medium of instruction is not their native language. They are learning a second language in order to learn concepts about basic science, maths, and other things about the world. Now, it is interesting, and this is a question that has been variously asked and has been asked about, several times in different fora, is this the best strategy for imparting education? For example, researchers have consistently asked this question, is that whether individuals would learn best and grasp the most basic concepts best in their first language or in a second language. Say, for example, in case of students going to an English medium school across India whose native language is not English, and they are being taught basic concepts about science and maths in English medium of instruction. So, is this something that is to be encouraged? Is this problematic? Does this have impact for people's overall cognitive development, scientific development, their ability to innovate, their ability to learn and appreciate the world? And these questions, therefore, have been asked, variously by different people at different times and place. Given that we are doing a course in bilingualism and multilingualism, it makes sense for us to sort of visit this idea of bilingual education and try and understand if there is, some merit to bilingual or multilingual education, or is it that, education should strictly be imparted only in the first language? Now, to begin with, a working definition of bilingual education would just be the use of two or more languages in the classroom through the medium of instruction in schools. Now, indeed, as I was just saying, it is very common for schools across the world to impart instruction in a dominant societal language, say English, while providing some support or instruction in the native language at the same time. For example, I went to an English medium school where mainly all the subjects were taught in English. However, Hindi was not totally left out. It was a subject wherein we learn to read and write in Hindi, also appreciate some grammatical aspects of it, and appreciate the literature of Hindi and so on. So basically, as far as I can tell, myself and a bunch of us actually go to these schools which are imparting bilingual education in a certain extent. Now, before we go in more detail about this, a very important distinction needs to be made between language instruction and language support. Language instruction is more like the medium of instruction in a given school. For example, it refers to a practice where all content area instruction is imparted in that specific language. Say, for example, an English medium instruction school imparts all subjects in English medium. A Hindi medium instruction school imparts all, subject knowledge in Hindi language. Similarly, a Tamil or a Bangla or a Marathi medium school would do. Whereas on the other hand, language support basically refers to the fact that whereas content area education is being imparted in a different language, one of these languages could also be imparted some kind of language support by including it as a language subject, for example, in the curriculum, where children are at least, asked to learn to read and write and appreciate that language to a certain extent, so that they're not, sacrificing their proficiency in that language while still being more proficient in the dominant language, which is the language of instruction. So for an Indian setting, you could basically contrast, an English medium school where all instruction is in English but Hindi is a subject, versus a Hindi medium school, for example, where all instruction is in Hindi but English is a subject. So this is basically what bilingual education basically looks like, and you can follow either of the two models, which is a language instruction model or a language support model. Now, basic question here to that has been asked and that I was putting forward to you was that whether students actually grasp concepts better, they are able to think about abstractions better, innovate better in the language that they understand the best, or it could also be achieved in a second or a third language. Now, given that you have done this course and we've read so much about bilingual language acquisition, I'm sure you would remember that as long as a student is actually going to school and learning the two languages at a very early age, let's say 2.5, 3 years of age, which is the common age of school admissions, in India, ideally they would be able to appreciate both the languages to the best of the abilities possible. The second language also matures along with the brain. It also matures along with the abstract development of abstract thinking and other higher order cognitive skills. So ideally, if a child is getting into a school at 2.5, 3 years of age and is being imparted education in two languages or three languages for that matter, I don't think it should be a major problem, because their brain maturation and other cognitive development are happening in both the languages at the same time. There is as much as we've seen, there is not really a significant lag in the linguistic and cognitive abilities for these very early bilingual children in either of their two languages. It is very common for people like, say, for example, myself, where at home nobody spoke in English, and at school nobody was encouraged to speak in Hindi. So the idea is that both the languages are getting their own space and time and are being acquired at the same time, at the same pace, to the same level of proficiency and detailing, and therefore I would say that I probably did not suffer from the lack of knowing English. However, this would become a problem if children are being admitted to schools, let's say at 6, 7 years of age, or say, for example, they are suddenly switching to a different mode of medium of instruction, and where on top of learning and grasping the scientific concepts, they have this additional job of picking up the second language as well. And therefore, this is something that is something that researchers, educationalists, policymakers have really wondered about. And you can see that there are consequent changes in, let's say, the national education policy, which have come from time to time, the most recent being the national education policy of 2020, which places a certain emphasis on imparting these basic concepts in the native language of individuals, while not entirely shunning off the use of the second language, which is English, for the most of us. Moving on, an interesting model of schooling that is followed mainly in the Western countries could be considered, which is where students are initially provided with literacy, for example, able to learn to read and write, and some content area instruction in their home language, say, for example, French in France, or Dutch in Netherlands and Belgium, Spanish in Spain, Finnish maybe in Finland, and so on. While they also receive explicit instruction to learn the dominant language, which could be English. So they're starting their language education in their native language, but there is obviously some instruction in the dominant societal language like English as well. Now, this would basically, create a situation where individuals will be able to grasp the critical concepts in their native language, but at the same time, they'll not be lagging behind in their skills pertaining to the second language, which is, a lingua franca, which is an important language to know and to acquire at around the same age. Now, in such a program, as a student is progressing through and is attaining higher levels of proficiency in the dominant language, you will see that the ratio of native language versus the second language actually changes. If, for example, from early school to middle school to high school to college, the ratio sort of starts getting reversed. Initially, it is first language, a lot of first language and a little of second language, and gradually what it happens is by the time the individual comes to college, it is a lot of second language and some of first language which is there. So researchers have actually opined that that this kind of model can be a very beneficial model, which basically allows individuals to not sacrifice their proficiency in a dominant societal language, while at the same time making the most of learning the most critical concepts about the world, abstract thinking, etc., in the language that they understand the best, which is their native language. Besides these things, researchers have, besides these obvious advantages for cognitive development and academic achievement, researchers have also opined that the purpose of bilingual education is to build tolerance towards other linguistic and cultural groups and at the same time foster appreciation for human diversity. If you look at your society, if you look around yourselves, you will find that individuals are, we are actually living in a very diverse society. We are actually living in a situation where everybody speaks at least two, if not if not more, but in a lot of cases, say for example in the south of our country, people typically know, my friends typically know 3 to 4 to 5 languages, because there are so many people around, and you have a chance, if you have a curiosity, you have a chance to interact with them in the different languages they know. It also allows us to appreciate different cultures, appreciate different look more sympathetically towards linguistic and cultural differences, build some kind of tolerance towards them, and basically build an overall and cohesive community. So again, this is very, very interesting. It's very, very important that individuals become in some sense accepting of the culture and linguistic differences, and the society overall will prosper better if it is a united society, if it is a society where everybody can communicate with each other and understand each other, and obviously be able to accommodate each other's preferences and unique styles. So let's look at some, moving forward, let's look at some common annals of bilingual education. Now, bilingual education is not something new. It's not something that has just come up. In fact, the practice of bilingual education, as researchers have documented, probably dates back to as long as 4,000 to 5,000 years ago, back to the biblical times. For instance, Baker observes that bilingualism and bilingual education would have actually become desirable whenever people of different language groups would have come in contact. For instance, he speculates that bilingual education would have been very common for ancient Greeks and Romans and those primitive societies where people were still traveling to different parts of the world and come in contact with different language groups. Also, other researchers such as Bedsmore have actually noted that bilingual education existed in Europe, parts of Europe long back, and also in the United States of America, on the continent of North America, for as early as the 17th century. Now, if you sort of look at it, bilingual education is inherently tied with political, economical, historical and socio-cultural factors which actually govern whether in a given society at a given point in time bilingual education is actively promoted, it's frowned upon, or is explicitly restricted. See, typically what happens is that it depends upon the composition and nature of society. It depends upon the ideological sway in the society. It depends on economic factors. It depends upon historical, socio-cultural factors. For example, if two linguistic groups have a lot of bad blood between them, then they would not want their community members to learn the other language, which interestingly fuels these differences, fuels the bad blood, fuels the fights and so on. So while ideally the ideal scenario is that everybody understands each other and they sort of have a common language, or at least they know a little bit of each other's language. But again, these decisions are tied with so many of these different factors, and so many of these different factors actually come together in deciding what kind of an education policy, what kind of a language policy a given region of the world is having at any given point in time. I mean, interestingly, Leibovitz actually remarks that language policy, including and not limited to decisions about the medium of instruction in school, is rarely about languages themselves, but rather it has always been about the groups of people who speak non-dominant languages but enjoy a lot of social sway in the larger society, and as a means of social control or dominance they basically use or start peddling or forcing everybody to learn their language. You may for understanding this point better, you may reminisce or you may basically try to think about the colonial era, the imperialist era, where, say for example, the English colonized different parts of the world. There were very few in India as well, but because they enjoyed that much social power and political dominance, English medium education sort of became deeply embedded, and the English ways of education became very deeply embedded in India's school education system. Now, in our context, we could actually also talk about, say, for example, the introduction of the tri-language formula in the education policy of the country, which goes as far back as 1968 and maybe even earlier, which basically mandated the acquisition of Hindi, English, and one regional language across the country, so that it allows a chance for linguistic groups to preserve their regional language, but also learn a lingua franca at that time, which is English, typically for large and diverse country like ours. More importantly, it also sort of, the learning of Hindi is in that sense optional, and it still stays there to a certain extent. Now, is bilingual education effective? Let's look at this question in some more detail. Now, researchers investigating the effectiveness of bilingual education have actually looked at the comparisons of children's academic performance in monolingual versus bilingual educational programs. For example, you can look at carefully designed experimental studies that would provide useful insights into the effectiveness of these programs. You would also look at, say, for example, meta-analyses which bring together a larger number of studies to sort of provide some insights into whether these things work or not. For example, one of the critical meta-analysis was performed by Baker and Decanter, who reviewed 28 studies on bilingual education and concluded that there was very weak research evidence in support of bilingual education. However, as I'm saying, a bunch of these things could be colored by experimental confounds, and so when this, Willig in 1985 reconducted the same meta-analysis using the same studies as Baker and Decanter, albeit with some slightly modified inclusion criteria, they found that the bilingual advantage was very prominent and it cut across all content areas and languages. Similarly, Green conducted a meta-analysis and concluded that the use of at least some native language instruction, in the instruction of limited English proficient children, actually has moderate to beneficial effects on the development and academic achievement of these children. Say, for example, in our English medium schools, if at least some concepts are imparted in Hindi or Tamil or Bangla, it would probably help children to sort of, get some buffer while they are learning English, while they are picking up these concepts to become better, and it sort of gives them that kind of advantage. Another seminal, meta-analysis was conducted by Rolstad, Mahoney, and Glass. Glass is, by the way, the individual who actually devised the meta-analysis technique, and they included 17 studies on bilingual education, and they concluded that bilingual education was found to be consistently superior than all English or all Hindi kind of approaches, and that bilingual education programs were actually instrumental in promoting academic achievement of students. So it seems like bilingual education is something interesting, and there is a lot of literature that supports the implementation and promotion of bilingual education. Now, in addition to these effects that we are talking about, the effects which are most overt in terms of academic achievements, grades, and how a child is developing, there are also other advantages that are associated with bilingual education. For example, bilingual education actually enables students to engage in wider communication across generations, regions, and cultural groups. So, for example, if you are going to only an English medium school and you're restricting your communication to English with your friends, and maybe you come back home and your parents are well educated, you're also restricting your talking to them in English. It happens. There is a chance that you would sort of lose connection with older generations. Say, for example, in my family, the grandparents and parents were not conversant in English, and if I had restricted my communicative repertoire to only English, I would obviously lose touch with them. And again, there is a treasure trove of knowledge that needs to be, that we need to pick up, that we need to learn from, older generations. And if you're restricting education in a particular language, and if you're not having this opportunity to talk to and engage with these older generations, we are actually going to be at a loss. Similarly, you will not be able to communicate to people from different regions within your country itself if you're not really conversant in at least one more language than what is the language of your own region. For example, English seems to be the lingua franca in today's day and time for India, because there are so many languages that all of us speak, and although it's from an unpleasant outcome of colonialism, but English has sort of become a language that everybody across India speaks. Say, for example, if you are in the south, if you are in the northeast, it is quite possible that they do not know Hindi, but it is quite possible that they have some exposure to English, and if you can put together some broken sentences in English, there is a high chance that you will be able to communicate with these people, understand them better, understand their cultural practices better, and in that sense have a better line of communication with them. Also, going forward, just extending this point, it allows us bilingual or multilingual education allows students to deepen their engagement with cultures associated with minority languages. It is sort of encourages them for having a sympathetic and a more tolerant understanding of culture and linguistic differences, which obviously augurs well, makes you a well-rounded individual, contributes to overall holistic development, and basically makes for a more cohesive society. For example, when I travel abroad, I see that there are Indian communions, Indian societies in most countries in the world for that matter, and where people are united because they are Indian, as opposed to, let's say, French or Dutch or Spanish individuals. And within the Indians group, you see that there are people who speak Tamil, Telugu, Bengali, Marathi, Hindi, and all of them have sort of glossed over their linguistic differences because all of them probably know, mainly know English, and they can communicate in that, and therefore it makes for a more cohesive society if there are ways for communication with each other across linguistic and cultural boundaries. And that is certainly a very, very important outcome of bilingual or multilingual education. Maybe it is one of the most important points because of which bilingual and multilingual education must be encouraged. Similarly, bilingual or multilingual education basically allows us to access more diverse literary practices. For example, there might be loads of books written in other languages that we cannot, be party to. We cannot read because we do not know that language. I for sure know that there are several great poets in Tamil, several great poets in Bangla, in Malayalam, which I cannot read, which I cannot understand firsthand because I do not know those languages. So if you know multiple languages, if the language system, if the education system allows you to learn so many languages, it enables you to communicate, it enables you to partake in the literary practices across different kinds of linguistic groups and cultural groups, and it basically also provides you with a broader understanding of the world, a more flexible perspective of the world, and in that sense augurs very well for the overall cognitive and educational development, personality development of individuals. Obviously, we have talked in the past about cognitive benefits that come with bilingualism and multilingualism, the flexibility, the task switching abilities, so many, and so many different kind of abilities that sort of come with bilingualism, and bilingual, multilingual education allows you to, take benefit of that. Finally, bilingual or multilingual education provides one very important, source of advantage, which is it opens up job opportunities, it opens up economic opportunities. Say, for example, as a business person, you can conduct your business in many parts of the world if you know their language. You will be able to be employed. If you are a service person, you'll be able to be employed in different parts of the world if you know their language. And in that sense, it creates a very solid reason why bilingual or multilingual education must be encouraged. Now, besides these economic things, besides the cognitive and academic attainment things, the benefits of bilingual and multilingual education are also seen at societal level. at societal level, at larger level. Say, for example, it makes for better and more informed, better educated and more informed citizens. It makes for better social relationships amongst people. It makes for more cohesive communities, like I was mentioning the example of Indian communities, the Indian diaspora across the world. It also makes availability for individuals who can communicate across linguistic and political boundaries, across international boundaries. You can understand each other. You can handle or deal with tourists, immigrants, diplomats, conduct businesses, political and otherwise. And therefore, I would very strongly suggest that bilingual or multilingual education is a very, very important aspect, and definitely there are merits in considering that. And given that we are doing a course in bilingualism, I'm sure this is something that would benefit you to know that bilingual or multilingual education is a very, very critical and an important area to focus upon. So that's all I wanted to talk to you about in this lecture. In the next lecture, I'll talk about a similar applied use for bilingual or multilingual education. So until then, goodbye and thank you.